the door of the rut chamber sealed behind Cale Draven with a sound like a held breath, finally released. Silver glass walls caught the low light and threw it back in fractured lines. 3 nights alone. That was the promise he made to his kingdom every year, and the promise he had never once broken. Then he heard the chains, a sound so small it should have been swallowed by the stone, and yet it reached him like a scream. He turned. In the far corner, half swallowed by shadow, a woman was bound to the wall by silver cuffs, her wrists raw where the metal had bitten deep. A strip of sealing tape covered her mouth. Her eyes found his immediately, wide and furious and terrified all at once. On the pale skin of her wrist, a mate mark burned faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the runes carved into the chamber floor. Cale felt his rut answer that mark before his mind could stop it. Heat surged through his blood, fast and merciless, and he understood in that instant exactly what had been done to him. This was not desire. This was a trap built from his own body. He did not move toward her. He planted both hands against the cold stone wall instead, forcing his weight backward, away from her, away from the pull screaming beneath his skin. He dragged his claws across his own palm until blood welled up, using the pain to hold his mind together. Only then did he look at her properly, at the cuffs, at the tape, at the fear she could not voice. I will not let them turn my hunger into your sentence. He wrapped his cloak around his hand so no bare skin would touch hers, and carefully peeled the tape away. She gasped in air, her whole body trembling, but she did not speak. He did not ask her name. He did not ask if she was his mate. He asked the only question that mattered. Can you say no? For a long moment she only stared at him as if no one had ever asked her that before. Her name was Seraphine Vale, and she had spent her whole life learning exactly how rare that question was. Before the chamber, before the chains, she had worked in the consent archive of Draven Citadel, buried among mating contracts, bride agreements, and rut waivers that smelled faintly of old fear. She could read a signature the way other people read a face. She knew which names had been written in a hand that shook. She knew which vows carried the flat, hollow rhythm of a silence charm underneath them. The other clerks called her the contract rat behind her back. Later, after the curse marked her skin for the first time, they called her worse things: the cursed clerk, the broken bride, the girl who saw what no one wanted seen. Her curse did not punish desire. It punished the law that called coercion a bond. Every time a mate bond, a marriage contract, or a breeding alliance was sealed without real consent, a mark bloomed across her skin like a wound that never quite closed. She had marks in 4 colors by then: red for a stolen choice witnessed by someone still living, silver for a contract signed without free will, violet for a silence spell forced beneath a vow, and white for someone whose forced bond had already killed them. She had one white mark that never faded, her sister's name. Elwyn Vale had been made to sign a breeding alliance to save their family from debt, her hand shaking so badly the ink had smeared. The official record called it a mutual agreement. Seraphine remembered the silence charm laid over her sister's throat just before the vow, and the calm, practiced voice of their mother saying a woman survives by choosing what has already been chosen for her. Elwyn died of what the healers called heart failure. Seraphine knew better. They did not kill my sister by dragging her to the altar. They killed her by teaching everyone to call the chain a choice. She had spent every year since hunting the proof no one wanted found, and now, chained in a chamber built to seal a king, she understood exactly why someone had finally decided she was dangerous enough to silence. Cale Draven had grown up with a different kind of fear. His father, the last Alpha King, had once lost himself to rut and hurt an Omega attendant so badly the household still would not speak her name. The shame of it had shaped the entire Draven bloodline, and it shaped Kale most of all. He trained himself the way other men trained for war, to fear the beast inside his own blood more than he feared any enemy outside it. So every year, when the fever came, he locked himself away completely. No guard, no healer, no Omega, no exception. The pack called it proof of control. The Elder Council called it royal responsibility. Kale called it the only thing that kept him from becoming his father. What he had never questioned was who held the keys while he was locked inside. The chamber's seals, its monitoring, its medicine, its silver locks, all of it answered to the Elder Council, not to him. He had spent so many years fearing the wolf inside himself that he never once feared the men standing outside the door. Elder Marius Voss had been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of opportunity. As head of the Elder Council, Marius did not believe mate bonds were built from love. He believed they were infrastructure, the load-bearing walls of a kingdom's power. Consent is a luxury peaceful pax invented. Kingdoms are built by bonds strong enough to survive refusal. KL was preparing to reform the mate laws that had protected men like Marius for generations, and Marius intended to end that reform before it could begin. He had arranged for Seraphine to be drugged, chained, and placed inside the Rut chamber, knowing that whatever happened next would destroy the king. If Kale touched her, he was a beast unfit to rule. If she died, he was a murderer. If he broke down the chamber door to save her, he had violated the very Rut law that made him seem disciplined. A woman who can say no to a king can unmake a dynasty. Marius had already prepared a forged document claiming Seraphine had entered the chamber willingly, ready to be produced the moment anyone questioned what had happened inside those walls. Back inside the chamber, Kale worked at the cuffs using broken metal and the edge of his own blood-slit claw, never once letting his bare skin meet hers. He asked her everything in small, careful steps. Whether she had been drugged, whether she wanted the second cuff removed before the first, whether she wanted him closer or further away. She did not trust him, not fully, not yet. She had watched too many alphas use their Rut as an excuse for things they wanted anyway. But when he asked if she had been drugged, she nodded and told him in a rough, cracked voice that someone had used a heat suppressant reversal on her, forcing her scent to spike in a way designed to break any alpha nearby. Kale's jaw tightened, but he did not move closer. He held the distance like a wall he had built himself. The mate bond pulsed between them anyway, warm and undeniable, and he did not deny it. He simply refused to use it. A bond that arrives while you are chained has no right to ask for a name. That was the moment something in Seraphine's fear shifted, just slightly, just enough to notice. Then her curse woke fully, and the chamber walls seemed to fill with names. Marks bloomed across her skin faster than she could breathe through. Each one a story of a choice that had been stolen somewhere in the kingdom. Kale saw contracts flicker like ghosts across her arms, bride clauses, Rut waivers, silence vows, and understood, in one unbearable moment, that the tradition he had trusted his entire life was built on exactly the kind of coercion his curse-marked prisoner existed to expose. One mark, pale and unmoving, carried a name he did not recognize: Elowen Vale. Seraphine's voice failed her from the pain of so many broken choices surfacing at once, and Kale reached instinctively for the door, ready to break it down and end her suffering even if it cost him his own mind. Do not break the door for me if it makes you lose yourself. I am not staying controlled for my reputation. I am staying controlled because you are here. When the chamber finally stabilized, and the guards were allowed back into the outer hall. Kale began pulling the night's records apart, searching for whoever had let Seraphine inside. The last guard seen near the Rut Wing was a young man named Tobin Marr. Seraphine remembered him too, remembered a mark on his skin the moment their eyes had met before the drugs took her under. It had been silver, not red. Silver meant his consent had been stolen as well, likely through some kind of debt oath forced on his family. But Tobin wore the same uniform as the men who had dragged her into that wing, and grief and fear made her cruel in a way she was not proud of. She said nothing. Kale, acting on incomplete information, ordered Tobin held for questioning. It became far worse than questioning. Guards beat him before any hearing could take place, certain they had found their traitor. He was thrown into a lower cell reserved for enemies of the crown. Marius, seeing an opportunity, threatened Tobin's younger sister with a debt bond, unless the family stayed silent about what had truly happened that night. While the court was distracted by Tobin's arrest, the real culprits sealed off the entire Rut Wing and set fire to a portion of the consent archive, destroying years of evidence. Healer Nara's private drug logs nearly burned with it. When Tobin was finally released, bruised and hollow-eyed, he found Seraphine waiting outside his cell. "You knew my no had been stolen too, and you let them call me the thief because I was wearing their uniform." Seraphine had no defense for that, and she did not try to build one. She understood in that moment that protecting consent only for people who looked like her victims was not protecting consent at all. It was simply choosing more carefully who she was willing to fail. Kale, meanwhile, pulled every record the Rut law required the crown to keep. Fever levels, chamber temperatures, seal timings, elder signatures, bloodline stability reports. Everything about his own body was measured to the smallest degree. Nothing about the women near that body was measured at all. No record of Omega attendants dismissed after Rut duty. No record of bride candidates drugged before a signature. No record of a single woman who had ever been permitted to say no and have it matter. His kingdom had measured every degree of an alpha's heat. It had never measured the silence of the women locked near it. Seraphine said it plainly, without softening it for him. A locked door does not become moral because the king is on the inside. Kale did not argue. For the first time, he understood that locking himself away had never been the same thing as protecting anyone else. Lady Isolde Crane arrived at court exactly as the Elder Council intended, poised, polished, and furious at the Omega who had disrupted the bride selection meant to secure her family's survival. She did not see herself as cruel. She saw herself as someone doing what needed to be done. Choice is beautiful when your family can afford it. It was not until Seraphine, almost by accident, glimpsed the edge of Isolde's own bridal contract that the truth surfaced. A silver mark bloomed faintly along the parchment the moment Seraphine touched it. Isolde had not been drugged. She had not been dragged anywhere. But if she refused the match the council had built for her, her younger sisters would be married off to far crueler alphas as punishment for her defiance. Isolde denied it immediately, furious at the accusation, because admitting it meant admitting the perfect bride she had built herself into was never free to begin with. Seraphine did not force her to speak. Forcing truth from someone was its own kind of chain, and she refused to become the thing she was fighting. It was only later, in the public hearing Marius forced into motion, that Isolde chose to speak on her own. Marius stood before the full court and produced his forged document, insisting Seraphine had entered the Rut chamber willingly, a manipulative Omega using an ancient curse to destabilize the crown. A signature is cleaner than a scream. Seraphine's reply came steady despite the pain still throbbing beneath her skin, only to the person who never had to swallow one. Marius invoked an old silence rune, trying to choke off her voice entirely before she could say more. Kale stepped forward, ready to use an alpha's command to shatter it by force. Seraphine stopped him with a single look. If an alpha's command was the only thing that could save her voice, the court would simply conclude that her choice still depended on him. What she needed instead was something no elder could quietly bury. She called it the open choice chain, proof carried not by one cursed woman alone, but by every witness the conspiracy had tried to silence. Tobin brought forward the debt oath used against his family. Healer Nara produced what remained of her drug logs. Archivist Ren carried copies of contracts thought long destroyed. An elderly Omega named Mara, who had served as a rut attendant during the old king's reign, stood and spoke of abuses buried for decades. Isolde stepped forward last, her bridal contract trembling slightly in her hands. I was trained to smile before I was old enough to understand what I was accepting. A choice carried by one cursed woman could be called rebellion. A choice carried by witnesses became a law no elder could bury. The chain of testimony revealed something even Seraphine had not expected. Elowen's death was not an isolated tragedy. For decades, the Elder Council had used rut law and breeding alliances to secure political loyalty, silencing and discarding women whose names never made it into any official record. Even the scandal of Kale's father had been carefully preserved by Marius, not out of mercy, but because a king ashamed of his own blood was a king easier to control. Kale realized his lifelong fear of becoming his father had been quietly weaponized against him for years. Marius, cornered by the mounting evidence, made his final move. He triggered the old rut runes buried beneath the hearing hall itself, hoping to spike Kale's fever in front of the entire court and force an impossible choice. Claim Seraphine and prove himself a beast, or collapse and prove himself weak, or silence her again and prove himself no better than the council he claimed to oppose. Seraphine's marks darkened toward black, a forced public claim building somewhere close. Kale reached for her, desperate to get her out before the runes reached their peak. If I leave before they hear us, they will put another woman in that chamber next year. What do you choose? I choose to speak before any bond speaks for me. The runes burned brighter, and for one terrible breath, Seraphine could not tell whether the scream trapped in her throat belonged to her or to every woman who had ever been taught to sign before she was allowed to speak. Every eye in the hall turned to Kael, certain they were about to witness a claiming. Instead, he drew his claw across his own palm again, and pressed his blood into the stone floor between them, drawing a line neither the runes nor the council could cross. No bond will cross this line unless she asks it to. Seraphine looked at him, at the court, at the ashes of everything Marius had built to break her, and spoke the word that shattered the forced claim completely. No. The runes cracked and dimmed. It was not a rejection of Kael forever. It was proof that no had to be real before any yes could mean anything at all. Marius was seized before he could reach the chamber doors, the open choice chain leaving no room left for forged signatures or buried records. In the days that followed, Kael refused to let the blame settle only on the Elder Council. He stood before the very chamber where it had all begun and spoke plainly to his people. I did not chain her in that chamber, but I ruled a kingdom where a locked door could make her silence useful. He opened the Rut chamber permanently to public review, tore apart the forged consent documents, and restored Elowen Vale's name to the record his family had let vanish. Tobin was formally cleared, though his forgiveness would take longer than any decree could grant. Every forced bond case in the kingdom's history was reopened for review, and Seraphine made certain no one, not even Kale, would decide which victims deserved to be believed. The reform that followed did not read like poetry, but it read like a wall finally built where none had existed. No rut chamber could hold another person without recorded consent. No rut law could override a person's right to their own body. No signature would count if the signer could not refuse without punishment. Silence charms were stripped from every mating contract in the archive. Heat and rut suppressants required witnessed consent before they could ever be used again. No bond shall be sacred if the person inside it was never free to refuse. Seraphine did not take on the title because Kale claimed her, and no mate mark decided it for her. The kingdom simply needed someone to make certain no one was chained again before they were asked. And so she became known as the Keeper of Unbroken Choice. Weeks later, she found Kale waiting for her in the quiet of the restored consent archive, far from any chamber, any council, any watching court. The bond between them still pulsed, warm and real, and entirely unclaimed. He did not reach for her. He did not call her Luna. He did not tell her fate had chosen them. "What do you want me to do with the bond?" "Nothing." He nodded slowly, and something in his shoulders eased, as though he had been waiting his whole life for permission to simply wait. "Then nothing." She had expected him to argue, the way every alpha in every record she had ever read seemed to argue with a woman's no. If your no changes nothing, then your yes would mean nothing too. It was the first time in her life that refusing someone had cost her nothing at all, and she sat with that strange, quiet safety longer than she expected to. A month after the hearing, the Rut Chamber no longer existed by that name. The old silver glass walls had been reshaped into what the kingdom now called the Free Bond Hearing Hall, its ancient runes stripped bare, its elder-only locks removed for good. Isolde brought her younger sisters there herself, standing beside them, as their contracts were reviewed for the first time by people who actually asked what they wanted. Tobin still stood guard near the entrance, but no longer as a jailer. He stood as a witness. Old Mara walked through the doorway without flinching, something she had not been able to do in decades. Elowen Vale's name was carved permanently into a wall reserved for choices the kingdom had finally restored. Kale did not sit above the room on any dais. He stood on the floor with everyone else, near the doorway, watching rather than ruling. Seraphine sat at the witness table, where a young Omega girl was asked, gently, whether she wished to continue with the bond hearing that had brought her there. The girl looked at her family. She looked at the Alpha chosen to be her intended mate. Then she looked at Seraphine. No one moved to punish her for it. No one called her selfish, and no one reached for a lock. The chamber had once been built to contain an Alpha's hunger. Now, under Seraphine's watch, it contained something far more dangerous to old power, a woman's answer. And for the first time in Draven history, the kingdom survived hearing no.